Hello and welcome to another MSEM set review. This is Dazon Cosmic Outcasts. First of all, before we jump in, this is a very enchantment based set, but we'll run through the mechanics so you can expect to see. So, first of all, we have Infuse. So, Infuse is a new mechanic. We're going to use this card, Sira, Lost in the Stars, as an example. So, Infuse 1 is whenever you cast a non creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature if it has none. And this appears with greater numbers too. Dutiful Companion has Infuse 3, so does Ghastly Hunter. The wording is when you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature if it has 3. I don't think that's right. I think it's supposed to be if it has less than 2, because it's supposed to be like, oh, if it has less than 1, it gets 1, and then it stops. So I assume it's supposed to be that, like, oh, you cast something, this gets a counter, and then you do it again. I can't imagine it's supposed to be if it has 2 counters, it gets another one. We also see omens. Omens are already a mechanic in canon Magic, but they do appear, I believe, for the first time in MSCM. Omen, one of my favorite mechanics from Dragonstorm, so I'm really happy to see it in a set. Here's a good example, like a 1 blue, kind of a sorcery speed consider there. Pretty nifty card. And then we have Uncover. So Uncover is you can cast this card as an enchantment from your graveyard for its Uncover cost, which I don't know if that makes it no longer a creature. I'm going to assume it does lose its creatureiness when you do this, but I'm not 100% certain of that. I believe those are all of the new mechanics. For some reason, I feel like I remember seeing one more, but I believe that's all the new mechanics that you can expect to see out of this set if it is to get into MSCM. This is a rarity-less set. You can see it's all rares. So that's the only mechanic we're looking at here is just rares. So no tricksy uncommons or commons or anything like that to have to review. But that is, those are the new mechanics that come with this set. If I see any other new mechanics, we'll cover them with the card. But that is to say, with that, let's get into the set proper. One of the things that's hard about reviewing this set is that so many of the cards are so self-synergistic. Like, I think if decks do come around with this set, they're going to be entirely, like, very heavily cards from Dazon. For example, like Designed Emptiness here, white is super heavy on +1/+1 counters and enchantments and / enchantment creatures. So this card, other enchantments you control enter with an additional +1/+1 counter on them, and then enchantment, it can animate an enchantment, which just kind of lasts forever. Again, isolation, not great, but you get like the Arbiter's Watcher, which has First Strike as a counter on it. So if you play this out of the Designed Emptiness on board, it's just a 3/2 with First Strike, which is a pretty good rate. Or like Laban Guardian, which gives you enchantment creature tokens whenever a non-token enchantment creature you control enters. Lost Curiosity, which lets you sack an enchantment to exile a creature and lets you put a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures whenever you cast an enchantment spell. You would maybe be running Paths of Stolen Life, which when you attack, it puts a counter on something, and then you untap each creature tool with a counter on it. Again, like the reason I'm covering all these cards in this row is because in isolation, I don't think there's a counters deck that exists right now. There might exist a counters deck. I mean, there's that 2-mana dwarf that puts a +1/+1 counter on stuff. There are some kind of Luminant or Luminarch Aspirant type effects that exist in the format already. It's not impossible that this is already a deck that exists, but I think in this context, like, this deck will live and die by these cards from Dazon. I don't think it currently exists, and like in isolation, no one's just gonna run Laban Guardian. They're gonna run it with Lost Curiosity and Designing and all that. They'll be running it with Illuminating Vortex, which is also like a pumping effect. Which this does get in this issue of there's a super heavy emphasis on 2 mana, which is kind of awkward, and a lot of them aren't inherently creatures, so you can't necessarily Monument of the Fallen Man to help accelerate these cards out. I don't know if there's a way to cheat out 2 mana enchantments, like Reef Crown Egg, I think got banned or nerfed super heavily. But the point is that there's a deck that can be created here Underpass Sentinel's the dwarf I was thinking of, but there's decks that already use a lot of small creatures with those counters. There might be a lot of decks that use enchantment creatures already, and that can make a big use of this. I mean, like Drury Voyager gives your creatures counters on a vigilance, and this is probably almost certainly too slow. It would have to put counters on something every upkeep in order to be useful, but or not too slow, but a bit too expensive. But like there's this deck that would exist with the format, and this is something therefore to keep an eye on, is if this set gets in the format, enchantments are going to become all the rage for at least the next GP. All of that is not to say that there aren't some relevant cards though in this still. Doom Teller Adept, 1 mana 2/1 that when it enters can exile up to 3 target cards from a graveyard. I think you'd rather have a nicer body and maybe a more expensive creature. Doing this turn 1 isn't always great, but against like Unearth, this is a great option to kind of pace their creatures a smidgen. I mean, it dies to anything in Unearth, which makes it a little bit tough, but you play it out against a turn 1 mill spell and you can limit your opponent's options from their graveyard early. In that way, this match is good up against Unearth because it's something that it puts pressure on the board and it's able to affect your opponent's abilities to play to the board themselves. They can't unearth creatures that are in exile. Last Sleight of Naros, this is an enchantment card, but this definitely doesn't fit into that enchantment deck I was talking about earlier. This is a lot more of a combo card. I don't know through what mechanism you're going to put an enchantment that's very expensive onto the board. Maybe this is useful with something that can cheapen itself in terms of its cost, like, oh, it's 6 mana, but there's a reduction effect on it. Some kind of mechanism like that, and then you're milling yourself too. It's a bit of an A and B problem. But for 1 mana, low opportunity cost, I think this could be a piece of a deck that is probably not broken, but will be a lot of fun. And I hope that it's a lot of fun if this set gets in. Sunset Dreamer is probably one of the cards I think that could see the most play in these countery decks. This could be a card that sees play outside of the context of those other cards, which obviously doesn't matter. This card isn't going to get it on its own. But it could be a 2 mana 3/3 and can put counters on your stuff if it hasn't scaled up yet. I don't think it's impossible for this to see some value. It's just, again, this set is just so full of 2-drops. Like, the white deck is basically just mono 2-drop enchantments, which I guess does kind of limit its effectiveness just inherently through a little bit of metric like that. But it is interesting to see how it will play out if it gets in the format of if the too many 2-drops becomes just an issue of it's too hard to get something rolling. The one thing this set will definitely offer white is some good removal options. This card, Tree of Celestial Light, it seems like a really good option. When it enters, exiles a creature opponent controls a mana value less than or equal to the number of enchantments you control until it leaves. For 1 mana, this is a really hard rate to beat. You know, obviously you need to be running other enchantments for this to be useful, but maybe if you're on, I know there's another enchantment that exiles stuff like this. If you have, like, I don't know how many, like, seam rips / portable holes the format has, but all it takes is using another one of those, and this can easily be scaling just a little bit. But early game, it's a great way. 1 mana, I'm going to answer your 1-drop for a little bit. And the other solution for this is Undefined Reference. Undefined Reference is 2 mana, exile target non-land permanent. Its controller draws a card. I know giving your opponent a card, very bad. This is card negative. You're giving your opponent a card in exchange for spending one of your cards to blow theirs up. So you're -1, your opponent is 0. But 2 mana, unconditional, exile, target non-land permanent. I think this is a lot of freedom that you have, and I think it's really good. Again, the card draw will be hard, but, you know, we give people 1/1s in exchange for exiling their creatures. The versatility here, I mean, it's not quite Journey's End, maybe. It's not quite, Beyond the Veil or whatever, but I think this will see some play, specifically if a deck wants an instant in the 2 mana slot. Like, this is one of the better options you can have, and it's always playable. It's almost always playable. The themes for blue in this set, similarly a little bit tied together. So Sky of Bea is the example here. So it surveils 2 and draws a card, and this set really likes to use Surveil in place of scrying or anything like that, which is A lot of graveyard interaction. We already saw, the Last of LaRose is another. There's a white riff on Unearth that I didn't cover that I could have covered in the enchantment section. So there's a lot of Surveil, and then this has whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, you may return Sky of Bea from your graveyard to your hand. The way this set goes around it in its environment is mostly omen creatures. So you'll see like Wavebringer, here Stack Popper. If I go up here, there's Ethereal Spellbinder, which is it's an omen creature. There's Cosmic Roamer, which has a discount effect. There's something like Cosmic Watcher that's just a big creature. It mostly does it in the creature way, and obviously the limitation to this is that for any deck you have to get to 5 mana and you have to be intending to cast this stuff regularly for these cards to be that good. It limits your curve a smidge, so I don't think there's going to be a like power 5 or greater, mana value 5 or greater mechanic like deck that's going to get really popular. Albeit, you'll see stuff like Ice Droid that has these reduction effects, and Ice Droid really good. I guess it comes down to how many cards with mana value 5 or greater have reduction effects that are easy to use, which I haven't looked into extensively because I'm not the deck builder. I just tell people about the cards. But there are still some interesting cards here. Obviously, I do think Sky of Bea maybe has a chance here. This would be a really useful card. Anything that could just come back from your graveyard to your hand is really nice to have no matter what. You only really need to be able to trigger this once or twice and get some value out of your graveyard for this to generate a lot of value over the course of a game. And I talked about generating value. Another bit of a slightly more minor theme in this set is casting spells during your opponent's turn. So Twilight Revelation is look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 to your hand and the rest into your graveyard, and then if you cast 2 more spells during that player's turn of the game of each opponent's end step, you get it back. I think this does take a lot of the hurt off of, this is not, it's a sorcery. You can't cast this on your opponent's turn, thank the Lord. But I still think it's very easy to get a lot of use out of this. Now, it is hard because you have to have this card in your graveyard and then do this. But again, you could have a situation where you mill a handful of these and then you just need to cast 2 spells on your opponent's turn. You're getting a bunch of cards back into your hand. You don't even need to be casting these. You can use those for discard costs. You can get a lot of incidental value out of these cards. And that can just take you in a very, very deep. Again, you get incidental value off of discarding. Stuff like this, honestly, is a little scary. Just the ability to recur infinitely like this. I don't know how many decks would want it. I think the 1 mana slot in a lot of blue decks might be open. If you would draw a card, is Whisper of the Arbiter, if you would draw a card and said you look at the top 2 cards of your library, exile one of them and put the other into your hand, it's kind of like a mini Miri's Guile almost. Pretty much every time you would draw, you get to scry 2 first, which is absurd value. Being able to scry once on your upkeep is a very valuable effect. Being able to scry pretty much every time you draw is an extra valuable effect. Is this worse than scrying? Yes. But it's also every single time you would draw a card. Now, there's limitations. You don't get card draw triggers because it's replacing your card draw, though. It also means you can't accidentally deck yourself out if that would matter. So there's a minor limitation to this. But this seems like just a lot of value, and especially the fact that you can get it turn 1. If your opponent doesn't answer it, all of your draws are basically 50% better until they do get rid of it. Now, it's a 1/1, it's easy to get rid of, but I think that any blue deck that has any room at the bottom of their curve absolutely wants to take a look at this card if this set gets into the format. If there is a card that's important in the 5 or greater archetype, it might be Leviathan Caller. 1 mana when it enters Surveil 2. I think this is like really good. This might even just see play outside of those decks in like a Reanimator deck. The side value, being able to get one of your Reanimator targets and put it into your hand to discard, would be valuable. And Surveil 2 is better than like maybe milling. Obviously, it's better than milling 2 because you can choose to not mill your unearths and only mill your good creatures instead. But there's a lot of value out of this, all things considered. Black in this set is pretty much all about the graveyard and all about not just both enchantments and creatures in the graveyard. There's a lot of just graveyard value and a little bit of a focus on some card draw too, along with a absurd amount of removal options at the table here. Fallen of Kara. This is kind of just a random card. It doesn't really match up. But I mean, for example, you got Pass Left Behind, which lets you surveil 4, and then you can draw a card. There's Seeker of Eternity, which when it enters, you draw a card. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. Just a lot of drawing a card and then losing a life, and maybe it's you and maybe it's the opponent. I mean, for example, Harbinger Demise. Whenever one more creature is commented to player, you draw a card and lose 1 life. But there's also Crystallized Dread. Whenever a player draws a card, each opponent loses 1 life. It's a really surprisingly kind of narrow, all things considered. I mean, there's lots of removal options, lots of drawing cards, and losing a smidgen of life. As for good cards, I'm just going to cover pretty much all the removal that I can in one little burst here because there's a lot of removal. Again, Abyssal Callback. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each 1 life an opponent has lost this turn. Destroy target creature, you gain life equal to its mana value. 3 life's not a lot. You really only need this card to cost like 2 to be good. Dark Dragonfire, this 2 mana instant speed, gives the creature -3/-3 until end turn, which is a solid rate. And then you can pay 3 mana and exile it from your graveyard to kind of replace itself. That added bit of utility on a removal spell can be really good. All it takes is a deck that needs a little bit of value. Into Eternity, it's like baby Vibrant Rapture. 3 mana, all creatures get -2/-2 until end turn, and you create tap treasure token. The difference between 3 mana -2/-2 and 3 mana -1/-1 is pretty big. I do think the limitation of modes here makes it a little bit tricky for this one to see a lot of play. Is that it for the removal? That's it for the removal, although there is also Writhing Mound, which when it enters makes a player sack a permanent. And then at the beginning of each end step, if a non-land permanent you control left the battlefield, your opponent loses 2 life, which the idea of this is so that you are supposed to be the one sacrificing your stuff and getting a lot of value out of it that way. But the removal suite here is pretty interesting. I think I brushed over one, actually. Here, I think I brushed over Circular Import, which destroys target creature, then it puts a card in exile into its owner's graveyard, which is a very interesting effect. I guess this could be a sideboard answer to your opponent trying to get stuff into exile. Like, this could be an answer to, like, creatures that, like, Doomteller out of. This would be an answer to that. I don't know if this would stick around. I think meddling with exile like this is kind of off limits at times, but we'll have to see if the set gets in. As for the more general pieces, again, obviously there's decks that's trying to sacrifice their own stuff, but with the amount of support baked into this set, similar to white, a lot of the cards are going to see play in kind of the same decks. The one that I think breaks through the most would be this one, Dracoli Piracy. This one has when it enters, you can sacrifice a permanent, and then once each turn, just any turn where a card you own is put into the graveyard from the battlefield or your hand, you can draw a card and lose 1 life. So this is a good example. Just there's a lot of versatility here. Decks that mill themselves maybe don't love this, but any deck that's sacrificing permanents regularly, any deck that is discarding cards with regularity is a deck that would want this effect. So it's very easy to get a lot of value off of this, just in any deck, really, that's sacrificing stuff or discarding. I touched on it briefly earlier, but Seeker of Eternity looks like one of the best cards in the set, just in terms of damage. When it enters, you draw a card, and whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. 2 mana cards that replace themselves, I mentioned this in AQ, it's a really good thing to do as a 2 mana card, and this represents a lot of damage really quickly. I mean, obviously it pushes a point of damage onto your opponent immediately, but if it sticks around for any amount of time after that, it'll just keep getting worse. So makes your life really difficult for your opponent. Also, this card, Shadowmare, Uncover on this card I think is really good. Being able to get this trigger twice and only 1 mana both times, not bad. Enters, discard a card, surveil 1 and draw. It's not crazy good, but obviously you're discarding cards. Mentioned there's other cards in this set that care about those kinds of discard triggers. Again, just 1 mana to get it back means you can use this as either an attacker or a blocker super easily, and you can get value from it even after it's passed away. And you can get a lot of value. It's a very good ETB. Just a 1/1 creature. Put something on the board and can help sculpt your hand. Red in this set is super prowessy and stormy and all that stuff. So here, example of Herald of Sparks, 3 mana, 1/1, but it costs 2 less to cast if you cast a non-creature spell this turn. It's got prowess, and when it enters, it basically gives you a Phoenix's Gift, which this just immediately strikes me as one of the best cards. Of course, limitation being you kind of have to worry about this as a creature, but I think the value off of this is really clear. Just the ability to play this card, and when it enters, you get Phoenix's Gift. It's just 1 mana if you're able to play another card. I mean, if you're a Storm deck, you can think of this as a creature, so it's a kill metric because it has prowess, but it's also just a card draw card for you too. It does, it does both things, and I think for that value, we'll give it a lot of presence, regardless of any of the other cards that it might come around with in this set. Careless Whims is an interesting card draw option for, again, maybe those red kind of stormy decks. Exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you can play one of them this turn. Of course, there's a lot of limitations here. You only get it for this turn, so you can't turn 1 this to get any kind of value. You can only play one of the cards, so it is obviously limited. But I think the opportunity, the amount of cards you get to look at here is still really good for 1 mana, all things considered. I don't think you can complain. Demon of Ruinous Fire is one of the better options in terms of cards. Now, I don't know if this is intended to read whenever you cast a spell that targets, just in general. I'm going to assume it is, though. So whenever you cast a spell that targets, gets +2/+0 until end turn. The ward cost is pretty high. Your spell's going to cost 1 extra mana and 3 life, which means you're getting a lot of value out of this card, even if your opponent just tries to blow it up instantly. And on top of that, it's scaling whenever you cast any spell that targets, which I imagine it's really easy to make a deck that's pretty much just spells that target through some kind of deck building trickery. I imagine it can't be very hard to get that kind of effect. Rolling, and all it takes is like Menace or Trample or something, and this does a lot of damage really quickly. There's a lot of red creatures that are kind of supposed to be that beast for a Storm deck, but I think this is the one that is the most compelling to me. Pillar of Fury is interesting. Just note this card does not really attacking creature you control. So in terms of being an attacking card, like this card works on either side of combat. It can either be a +2/+2 to your whole board if you're being attacked, or +2/+2 to your whole board if you're swinging. 3 attacking creatures for this to cost 1 is not very hard at all. I think this could be the kind of card that comes in as a combat trick out of the board against a heavy creature-based deck, and it forces your opponent to think through every combat super carefully. Like, obviously, if you're on burn, it kind of forces them to block your creatures more protectively, knowing that you could have Pillar of Fury and just kill them a lot of the time, and it forces your opponent to be more careful swinging at you when you have creatures untapped. Because again, for 1 mana, you could have a board buff that can just completely swing the game in your favor. I think mana cost to theoretical output here is really strong, and even if it ends up just a board card, this could see play in pretty much any red deck that has creatures, and a decent amount of them, not even a lot. It doesn't have to be a weenie deck. Just if you have the ability to put even 2 creatures on board, this is pretty good. The Arbiter's Strength just seems off the rip like a really strong creature. 3 mana for a 3/3 really is nothing to sneeze at, and paying 1 mana to copy a triggered ability of a non-creature enchantment you control. It is really powerful. Now, 3 mana, it kind of evades like your Theocracies and stuff like that, where you're not able to use this in the obvious kind of weenie decks, but I think triggered abilities of non-creature enchantments is more broad. I really think. I mean, the first thing this makes me think of, and I'm going to have to go find the card now. The first thing this makes me think of is Steward of Empire's Cradle, which recently got nerfed. It became a 3 mana card after people discovered it. Now, being able to, this triggers off of anything, obviously, but I do think that there is a lot of value still that you can get out of a card like this that allows you to copy abilities, especially if you have the mana to play with. A 2 mana ramp card. I know this isn't super duper common. I think Exhaustive Harvest saw a lot of play for being something like this. And while I don't think this is quite Exhaustive Harvest, I'll have to use my power of this, which Exhaustive Harvest is kind of the same thing of you get a forest, So this can get non-basic for us as well, I guess, but you also get that little bit of life gain. I wouldn't be surprised if there are decks that want this kind of effect so much that they also run this with Exhaustive Harvest, even though I think it might just be worst. But it's still rare to get 2-mana ramp cards like this in the format. In Search of Greatness isn't really the ideal Magic card, but I think In Search of Eternity might be. Now, the limitation, or the key feature here, is that this card triggers when a permanent control leaves the battlefield. It lets you cast a permanent spell. Now, the wording of do this only once each turn, I think implies you have more control over when you do this. Like, if you have a 4-drop leave, you don't have to play a 5-drop. You can wait until your 5-drop leaves and then get a 6-drop out. Just cast it for free. It's once a turn. I think the ability to manipulate the timing on this a lot more makes it a lot more powerful, albeit the downside being that there isn't a world where it doesn't trigger, then you still get to scry off of it. But I think there's a lot of power that you can get out of this, and I think you can get a lot of cast triggers really quickly. Here's another creature that cares about spells that target. This one, however, gets +1/+1 counters instead of +1/+0. Also comes with ward, can't be countered, has trample, a lot of good little things. Now, it's a small ward cost, but it's a real one. And I think that there's a lot of value in, again, cards like this. Targeting is just not that hard to do. It only takes like 1 or 2 counters for this to become a beast. I don't know, I think maybe we're in an era of MSEM where decks are just too tightly synergy packed for just good, efficient, hard to defeat beaters like this to be good. It's not 2012. We're not junding them out. But this card, I feel like, would fit really good into that beautiful, beautiful era of Magic. And hopefully it's good enough to see some play in this era of Magic as well. I don't know how hard it is to squeeze lands into your graveyard, but again, this is a 6/5. When it enters, it returns a land card from your graveyard to hand. It also regrowths, and it costs 1 less for each land card in your graveyard. I don't think it's too hard to fill up your graveyard with lands. I mean, lands that sacrifice themselves are some of the best in the format. In that way, it just seems like it's pretty easy to get a lot of value off this. It's got an ETB, so even if this card gets blown up instantly, you're still happy with it regardless. Another card that catches my eye is Unexpected Token. For one, just kind of an interesting name. Now, the immediate fear here is, oh, it's got spells you cast from 5 or greater, costs 1 less to cast. Now, I don't think this is Green Elemental Circle. It only costs 2 instead of 1, and it doesn't draw you cards, which I think is the much more important part of Green Elemental Circle, although this applies across the color spectrum, and it also gives you the value of getting you a basic land. So it's like you kind of draw 1 card. I don't know if that's good enough for this to be... It probably won't get banned, but it's probably maybe good enough to see a deck play it. Honestly, as a whole, the multicolor cards just don't really interest me all that much. They're just kind of on the expensive side for their effects. I mean, Warlock of Venomous Fire. You die to Scorch at 3 mana. You got Menace. I mean, there's draw your second card each turn, but you get a 2/2 with no abilities. I feel like you have to make 2 of those for this card to feel worth it. The ones I do think are useful, there's Peace and Twilight, which enter night is return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand and gain 2 life. I think the ability is pretty useful, even at a sorcery speed. I just don't know if you'd ever want to cast this enchantment. I mean, maybe. But I think it'd take a really specific kind of deck that has a lot of big, non-creature spells that you want to be copying. I mean, it does include any non-creature spells, so you could use this to copy an enchantment or an artifact. So it gives you a lot of reliability on that metric. I also think Risen Thicket, tree growth is not even growth spiral, but it's still an effect that exists. I don't think it's that bad, and this is eventually a good creature. I mean, it can enter and draw you cards and be a beater near the end of the game. It's just the question of if mediocre tree growth is good enough for people to be interested in getting the value out of it. But other than that, the two mana cards don't really interest me. There's a notable gap where I think a blue-red card would go, but there's just no blue-red card. I don't know if that's intentional or not. Given that blue and red have a very obvious synergy in the set of non-creatures, I'm surprised to see it missing. I wonder if Necromancer of the Depths also is good. I am now led to believe that Uncover keeps the cards as creatures, only based on the fact there's a creature that puts +1/+1 counters on itself with Uncover, which means it probably has to come back as a creature, otherwise its ability just doesn't do anything. In that sense, this is pretty good. I mean, being able to just cast stuff out of your graveyard is a pretty good effect, even if it's on a dinky creature. The 3 mana cards, or the 3 color cards, are much more interesting to me, though, all things considered. Endless Wreckage is a pretty good removal spell. 3 mana for 4 damage and Surveil 4, and then be able to exile it from your graveyard later to draw 2 cards and deal 2 damage to yourself, but also your opponent. I think that's pretty good. Knight of Bea creates tokens and anthems them. I think this is a pretty good effect. I don't know if there's quite a deck that would use this right now, but this Omen, I think, is kind of the ideal Omen. Most of the Omens in this set angle a little bit cheaper, or a little bit more expensive than I would like, which obviously, again, better safe than sorry. Watchful Gaze is like a semi-wilderness reclamation. Instead of being on tap up to 4 lands. It's not Angel of Succor or anything, but it is slightly harder to remove, and there's a little bit of incidental situation here where you can deal with your opponent's creatures, maybe blink your own stuff, a little bit of Will of a Fickle Lord kind of thing going on. Cosmic Incarnation, I think, is the last of these that interests me. It's got flying, it infuses 2, and then whenever it puts a counter on it, it deals 1 damage or something, and you can surveil 1. Jeskai has a lot of really good cards like this, and I think this could slot into a deck with, like, that card that gets stuff back from your graveyard that I can't remember. Incidental +1 damage, being able to surveil, all that stuff pretty good. I guess Drorix is also pretty good. -1, another target online permanent becomes an enchantment, lose all other card types. If it's a creature that needs to be a creature to be any good, -1 kind of gets rid of it off the board. It helps protect your own enchantments. The +1 lets you get some incidental surveil, and if you already have enough enchantments, you can create a token. I don't know if Abzan Enchantments has the grip that it would need for this to work out the way you'd want it to, but maybe it does. But those are all the multicolor cards I thought are interesting, and I guess a little thought on the set itself as a whole. You know Terraformer's Globe? What if it was in every color? Now, the limitation here, this is 2 mana, which is probably enough that this doesn't see any play, and you can only use it on your own turn. But the limitation of not needing, like, lands to get the value out of this, I guess, is pretty useful, and of course, every single color gets it. Yeah, we're onto the colorless cards. Space Light is pretty good. I think all enchantments causing 1 less to cast for 2 mana in any deck. I think that there's probably some world you can get value out of this. I mean, look at Darkwave Container. You can't use, like, Chromatic Starlight. It tells you can't use it because you have to spend mana to cast it to get the mana out of it. But I don't think it's too hard to get a lot of incidental value. But other than that, the colorless cards, I mean, it's the same as any colorless card. They're a little expensive because they have to be runnable in every deck. It just kind of hurts you in that regard. Let's shout out the Arbiter, though. I guess kind of one of the key players of the set, lore-wise. Kind of the one that's kind of controlling this whole universe, essentially, and who has a million. He's got a lot of shooters. Costs 1 less for each enchantment you control when it enters. If it was cast, you get control of your opponent for a turn. Really expensive, no keywords, can't cheat it out. Probably not really useful by any metric, although I think I just feel the need to shout out the Arbiter because there's so many cards in the set that, like, the Arbiter's this, the Arbiter's that. And it's a big part of the lore of this set. While we're on about colorless cards, I might as well go over these. The lands. So the land cycle here is a cycle of legendary land cities from the planet, I guess. I think the set takes place on many planets, but these are just cities that people live in. When they enter, you have to pay 3 life for them to come in untapped. They tap for their color, and there's also a 3 mana ability tied to it. Most of them are instant speed, except for Toshin. You can't get a combat trick, sadly. I think of these, like, all of them seem incidentally good. Shindu lets you copy an ETB once per turn, although a triggered ability you control that was caused by a permanent you control entering. I don't know if that's the right wording, but I can't think of what else it would be. And that's activate only once each turn, which on tap ability, but maybe there's obviously ways on tap lands. The most useful is probably Kama, like exile the top card of your library. You can play it until end of turn. That's just very obvious value late in the game when you got a lot of mana sitting around. Being able to just get another card draw each turn. Probably sees 1 or 2 of it in a burn deck or something like that, in case you're flooding out the ability to smooth yourself out a smidgen. There's also the Final Frontier, which is an enchantment land. I think it's the only notable thing about it. We already have enchantment lands in the format, though, so it's not super notable, except for the fact that it's slightly easier to use than the enchantment lands that we already have, the ones from Blackwall, which has this. Notably, these don't have the clause from these BTB cards, which is when they're destroyed, it goes back to your hand, so your opponent can disenchant this and you'll be very sad. But that's it for the set. We're going to admire these really cool arts of the basic lands while I go over this. As a whole, I do like this set. To give my honest opinion, I don't think it's going to get in. There's a few cards that are a little busto as a whole. A lot of the cards are just kind of undercosted for where they want to be. The flavor is interesting, although I think it's a little bereft of interesting characters. Like, obviously, there's the Arbiter, there's Drorix, but other than that, it's very much an establishing shot of a world, and I think with a Magic set, you can do a lot more than that. I think you can introduce a cast of colorful characters. I think you can introduce more interesting plot lines. There's a few instances of kind of miswriting, too, which I'm not going to go over. I don't want to critique. I feel bad critiquing any kind of set too much. But that's the thing, I do feel bad kind of doing this. But for example, like Uncover is a little bit unclear right now. Just the fact that I am confused about that, I think signals something. There's a few cards that are miswritten. Again, Infuse, what actually happens at higher Infuse numbers isn't necessarily clear. I think writing, there's a little bit of cleanup that needs to happen. I mean, lore-wise, but I don't know if lore is a huge indicator. As a whole, if I had to say one thing, any set that kind of feels slightly underpowered is always a really bad thing for me. And the reality is, like, a good set should be a little underpowered to some degree. Not every set needs to come into the format and completely flip it on its head. But I don't know how Council thinks. But this is how I think, is that the more cards you get out of a set that can see play, the better. I don't know how well this set will perform. There's just a slight sheen of it where I just don't know. And a lot of these cards with Infuse really do suffer as well. I like the new mechanics in this set, but the mixture of Infuse being weirdly written, and a lot of these cards are just kind of similarly overcosted. They're sort of balanced around already having all the Infuse counters, the Infuse being bigger than it is. Like, I just think some of these cards are just so weak when they come into play, and you're forced to quickly get out +1/+1 counters onto it. You have to either have stuff that you can cast instantly or some other kind of value in order to keep them safe. I can stop moving my hand around so much because it keeps slamming into my mic, which is just a tough thing about balancing this. The Omens, I really didn't see very many cards with Omens that I thought were interesting, and obviously I didn't play with Omens, but mostly the creatures on their sides. Like, you're limited, obviously. You have a smaller text box to work with. You only have so much space. The Omens themselves were good, but the creatures that were attached to them is what left me kind of wishing. There are good ones. I liked Ethereal Spellbinder, although I don't know if I actually went on at length about it. I think the blue ones mostly nail it. I think this one, like Counterspell tied to a thing, it's just 5 mana for a 3/4 with no keywords that is card neutral. I just don't know about it. It just doesn't really hit me in the gut where I want to be hit when it comes to cards like this. Again, I don't dislike the set at all. I just think its new mechanics aren't quite showed off perfectly. This world seems cool, and it's just the kind of thing of, I want more exposition about it. I just think there's not enough, maybe flavor text is the issue. Obviously, it's hard to squeeze flavor text, but maybe undefined reference. I mean, this is kind of a weird card, too. This isn't Beyond the Blackwall. This isn't a computer set. This is a space set. This is one, too. I didn't talk about this. The Arbiter steals. Does it steal? That's fascinating. You know, what does that mean? Where's the period? Is this inscription? I don't want to nitpick, though, too much, because I think there's other more concrete issues than the Arbiter steals. But really cool ideas. I like the new mechanics to a degree. Just think it needs like a little bit more time in the oven to become a set I'd be really happy with seeing in MSEM. But I'm not on the council, so my words mean nothing. I'll give you the Fantano. You know this is just my opinion, right? And thank you all for watching. This has been another Asti set review. I did go over this set pretty quickly. If I missed anything, feel free to let me know. I'm always happy to commentate on any of the cards I didn't mention in this video at length. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next one. I mean, I already did a second one that's further than I've gotten any other submission period, so we'll keep her rolling, hopefully.